The wind whistled low across the open plains, rolling dust over the cracked earth and ruffling the mane of the tired horse beneath a man built like a mountain. He was Jedediah Boone, Big Jed, to most folk between El Paso and Tucson. His hat shadowed a weathered face that had seen too much sun, gun smoke, and loss. He'd been driving cattle since dawn, pushing them toward a watering hole that hadn't seen a good rain in weeks. The herd bawled and moaned, restless under the baking sky. He tugged his bandana down from his mouth and squinted toward the horizon. Something small, a flicker of motion, cut across the shimmering heat. At first, he thought it was a stray dog or a coyote. But as the wind carried a faint cry to his ears, Jed straightened in the saddle. That was no animal. That was a child. He spurred his horse forward, the massive animal pounding across the dry earth until it came to a stop before a tiny figure in a faded blue dress. A little girl, couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, stood trembling, her hair tangled with dust and fear. Jed swung down from the horse, his shadow swallowing hers. "Well now," he rumbled, voice deep as gravel, "what are you doing way out here, little one?" The girl's lower lip quivered. She clutched a ragged doll to her chest, its button eyes hanging by a thread. "Mister," she said softly, "they want to hurt my mom. She's sick." Jed froze. He'd seen plenty of bad men in his life, and he'd seen desperation too, but something in the girl's eyes, wide and glassy with terror, made the muscles in his jaw tighten. "Who wants to hurt her?" he asked, crouching to her level. Her voice came out in broken gasps. "The men from the town. The ones with the red bandanas. They said she owes money, but she's too sick to get out of bed." Jed's brow furrowed. Red bandanas sounded like the McCready gang, a pack of debt-collecting vultures who'd been terrorizing small ranchers around San Sable. "Where's your mama now?" The girl pointed south, toward the line of twisted mesquite trees. "In the cabin. Please, mister, they said they'll come back when the sun goes down. I ran here to find help, but there's no one else." Jed let out a slow breath, staring into the distance. He'd been on his way to deliver cattle, collect his pay, maybe head to the saloon for a drink and a bath. But now there was this little girl, barefoot and shivering, asking him for help. He couldn't just ride on. Not with that look in her eyes. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lottie." "Well, Lottie," he said, picking her up gently and placing her on the horse's saddle, "I reckon your mama's got herself a new friend. Let's go have a word with these red bandana boys." The ride to the cabin was quiet except for the creak of saddle leather and the low hum of the wind. Lottie held onto the horn tight, glancing around nervously as if expecting shadows to jump out from the rocks. When they reached the clearing, Jed saw the place, a tiny one-room cabin, walls sagging, smoke barely curling from the chimney. Chickens scratched in the dirt out front, and the door hung slightly ajar. He dismounted, his boots crunching the ground, and called out, "Ma'am? You got company." There was no answer, just a faint cough from inside. Lottie wriggled off the horse and ran to the door. "Mama!" Jed followed her in, ducking under the low frame. Inside, the air was thick with dust and sickness. A woman lay on a cot, face pale, eyes half open. She looked to be in her 30s, though hardship had carved a lifetime into her skin. "Lottie," she whispered, voice weak as dry grass. "Mama, I found someone," the girl said, kneeling beside her. "He's big and strong, and he's gonna help." The woman tried to sit up but coughed violently, clutching her chest. Jed knelt beside her and poured a bit of water from his canteen. "Easy now," he said. "Name's Jed Boone. Your girl here says some fellas plan on payin' a visit." She nodded faintly. "They said if I don't pay by tonight, they'll burn the place down. I tried to tell them I can't even get out of bed." Jed's face hardened. "You got anyone nearby who can stand with you?" "No one," she murmured. "My husband passed last winter. It's just me and Lottie." Jed looked around the cabin, bare shelves, cracked dishes, a few sacks of grain nearly empty. She wasn't lying. This was survival, barely holding on. He rose to his full height, brushing dust off his coat. "Well, ma'am, I don't hold with men threatenin' sick women and children. You just rest easy. I'll handle it. The woman's eyes flickered open wider, studying him. Why would you help us? Jed paused at the door, glancing back with a faint smile. Because I once had a mama who got sick, and no one came to help her. Outside, the sun dipped lower, bleeding orange across the plains. Jed led his horse behind the cabin, tethering it out of sight. He checked his revolver, loaded 6, and slung his rifle over his shoulder. The shadows stretched long and thin when the sound came. Hooves. 3 of them. Jed crouched by the porch, waiting. 3 men rode up, dusty, mean-faced, and wearing those red bandanas Lottie had described. One spat to the side and laughed. Looks like the widow ain't skipped town after all. Burn the place, another said. Let this be a lesson to the others. Jed stood. Evenin', boys. The riders jerked in surprise. The biggest of them squinted. Who the hell re you? Just a rancher passin' through, Jed said, stepping into the fading light. But I can't say I'm fond of your business practices. The men exchanged looks, then the leader grinned. Ain't your problem, cowboy. Best ride on before you get hurt. Jed's tone dropped to iron. You touch this place, you will get hurt. A tense silence followed, only broken by the chirp of crickets and the creak of saddle leather. Then, one of the bandits reached for his pistol. Jed's hand moved faster than a rattler strike. The report of his gun cracked through the dusk, and the man's weapon spun out of his grasp, clattering to the dirt. Next one, Jed said calmly, goes in your leg. The other 2 froze. The leader's smirk faltered. He took in Jed's size, the steady aim, the unflinching eyes. This wasn't some hired guard. This was a man who'd seen gunfights and buried the fools who started them. Fine, the leader muttered. You win today. But this ain't over. They turned their horses and rode off, leaving a trail of dust and curses. Jed waited until they vanished into the twilight before lowering his gun. He let out a long breath and walked back to the cabin. Inside, Lottie ran to him, eyes wide. Did they go? Yeah, he said softly, patting her head. They're gone. Her mother smiled faintly from the bed, tears in her eyes. Thank you. Jed tipped his hat. Don't thank me yet, ma'am. Something tells me they'll be back. And next time, they'll bring friends. He looked out into the darkening plains, the first stars appearing over the horizon. Well, he muttered, pulling up a chair and checking his rifle, guess I'll be stayin' a while. The wind picked up after sundown, whispering through the mesquite trees like a warning. Jed Boone sat by the doorway of the cabin, hat tilted low, rifle across his knees. Inside, the faint light of a lantern flickered across the cracked walls. Lottie slept on a small blanket beside her mother's cot, her little hand clutching that tattered doll. The woman, though weak, seemed calmer, her breathing steadier since Jed had given her a few drops of medicine from his saddlebag. But Jed's mind wasn't resting. His gut told him those bandits weren't the kind to let an insult slide. They'd be back, maybe with twice the number. He leaned his chair back slightly, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. Red bandanas, he muttered under his breath. McCready's gang, sure as thunder follows lightning. A long moment passed before the woman spoke, her voice soft and cracked. You shouldn't stay, Mr. Boone. They'll come after you too. He didn't turn. Ma'am, I've been shot at more times than I've had birthdays. If they're comin', I'd rather meet 'em here than run. She coughed lightly, trying to sit up. You don't even know us. Jed finally turned his head, the glow from the lantern catching the edges of his weathered face. I know enough. You're a mother protectin' her young un. That's reason enough for me. The woman's eyes softened, and she whispered, My name's Clara. Clara Weston. The name struck Jed faintly familiar. He frowned. Weston? You any kin to Luke Weston? Ran cattle up by Painted Ridge. Her eyes flickered, and she nodded slowly. He was my husband. Jed exhaled through his nose. He had known Luke. A tough old cowboy with a big laugh and a heart even bigger. They'd driven herds together nearly 10 years back. "Damn shame," Jed murmured. "Luke was a good man." She smiled faintly. "He always spoke well of you. Said if anything ever happened, you were one of the few men he'd trust to look out for us." That twisted something deep in Jed's chest. He looked away toward the plains again, his jaw tight. Guess he got his wish. For a while, silence hung heavy. The only sounds were the hiss of the wind and the low groan of the wooden beams. Then, faintly, from far off, the sound of hooves. Jed's head snapped up. He stood and moved quietly to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see the faint flicker of torches on the distant ridge. At least 5 riders this time. "Damn," he muttered. He turned back to Clara. "They're comin'. You lock the back door, douse that lamp, and keep Lottie quiet. Don't open up for nothin'." Clara reached out, her hand trembling. "Mr. Boone." He placed his hat on tight and gave her a steady look. "Ain't no time for thank yous. Just trust me." Outside, the night swallowed him whole. He crouched behind the broken fence line, rifle ready, moonlight glinting on the barrel. The riders approached slowly, their laughter carried by the wind. "Reckon he's still here?" one called. "Hope so," the leader replied. Jed recognized the voice, the same man he'd disarmed earlier. "I owe that ox-sized fool a bullet between the eyes." They fanned out, torches casting wild shadows over the cabin walls. Jed waited, patient as a stone. Then, crack! His rifle thundered. A torch burst in the leader's hand, scattering sparks. Horses reared, men shouted. "Ambush!" someone yelled. Jed fired again, this time clipping another man's shoulder and sending him tumbling from the saddle. The rest scrambled for cover, returning fire blindly. Bullets thudded into the fence, splintering wood. Jed dropped low, reloaded, and rolled behind a rain barrel. He could hear Lottie's faint cry from inside, muffled by her mother's arms. The leader cursed. "You got no business dyin' for that woman, Boone. She owes us." Jed called back, voice calm and booming through the night. "Ain't no debt worth killin' over. You ride away now, I'll forget your faces." "Not a chance," the man snarled. "You don't know who you're messin' with." "Yeah," Jed growled, chambering another round. "I do." Another shot rang out. This one found its mark. The leader's hat flew clean off as he ducked behind a barrel. Jed moved quick, silent, circling around the cabin's side. Years of trail work had made him stealthy for a man his size. When one of the outlaws tried to creep toward the porch, Jed tackled him hard, wrenching his gun away and sending him sprawling. The scuffle drew the other's attention. 2 more charged his way. Jed swung his rifle like a club, cracking one across the jaw and firing point-blank at the second's boot to send him screaming into the dirt. The leader, realizing the tide had turned, jumped back onto his horse. "You'll regret this, Boone," he shouted as he fled into the darkness. Jed aimed, but hesitated. The man vanished beyond the trees. Silence settled again. Only the chirp of crickets and the soft rustle of the wind remained. Jed stood breathing heavy, the scent of gunpowder in the air. His arm throbbed where a bullet had grazed him, but he ignored it. He walked back to the cabin and knocked softly. "It's done." The door opened, and Lottie peeked out, eyes wide. "You're hurt." He smiled faintly. "Nothin' but a scratch, darlin' dot." Clara looked pale but relieved. Are they gone?" "For now," Jed said, stepping in. "But I reckon the law oughta hear about this. McCready's been runnin' wild too long." Clara hesitated. "You won't find the law helpin' us here. Sheriff's on their payroll." Jed frowned. That explained a lot. "So," he said slowly, "that's how they've been gettin' away with it." She nodded. "They own half this county. They took Luke's ranch after he died. Said it was payment for back taxes." Lottie tugged at Jed's sleeve. "Mr. Boone, will they come again?" He knelt beside her, voice gentle. Not tonight. I promise. She hugged him tight, surprising him. You're like Papa, she whispered. Something warm flickered in Jed's chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years. He patted her shoulder awkwardly. Your papa'd be proud of you, little one. Later, after he'd patched his arm and the house grew quiet, Jed sat on the porch with his coffee tin, staring out at the stars. Clara's voice broke the silence. You really mean to fight them? He didn't look back. They started it. But I'll finish it. She stepped beside him, a shawl around her shoulders. You could have ridden away, Mr. Boone. Jed's jaw worked a moment before he answered. Maybe once I would've. But not anymore. She studied him. You've lost someone, haven't you? He gave a short nod. Wife and boy. Fever took 'em both. Her face softened. I'm sorry. He tipped his hat slightly. Ain't your fault, ma'am. Just this cursed land. They stood in silence, two weary souls under the same moon, until the first hint of dawn began to stain the horizon pink. Jed looked toward it and said quietly, When morning comes, I'm ridin' to town. MacCready's got to be stopped, one way or another. And behind him, Clara's voice came low, steady. Then I'm coming with you. He turned, surprised. You're barely strong enough to stand. Her gaze was fierce. He ruined my husband's name, took our land, and threatened my daughter. I won't hide any more. Jed nodded slowly. There was iron in her voice, the kind that only came from heartbreak turned to courage. He slung his rifle over his shoulder. Then we'll end this. Together. By mid-morning, the plains were alive with heat and dust, but Jed Boone and Clara Weston rode steadily toward Painted Ridge. Lottie stayed behind with neighbors who had quietly offered their small cabin as a temporary refuge, though Jed made her swear to stay inside and not open the door for anyone. The town of Painted Ridge was little more than a scattering of wood and tin buildings, but it had teeth, the kind Jed had learned to respect. MacCready's gang had a grip here, and everyone knew it. Windows were shuttered, and doors were bolted as the pair rode into the dusty street. Jed's horse, a massive bay named Thunder, snorted and pawed at the ground, sensing the tension in the air. Clara's mount was smaller but equally determined, its rider's jaw set tight. Thinkin' we walkin' guns blazing? She asked quietly, her voice like steel under silk. Jed shook his head. No, not yet. We need eyes first. He nudged Thunder toward the saloon. Through the dust-streaked windows, he saw the gang lounging, whiskey in hand, laughing and tossing cards. MacCready, a broad-shouldered man with a cruel grin, sat at the center, his red bandana a vivid slash of color in the dim light. Jed's eyes narrowed. That's our boy, he muttered. And the others, too many for a straight fight. We need a plan. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. Then we make them think we're weaker than we are. Let 'em get careless. Jed smirked slightly. I like the way you think. They tied their horses to a post and slipped into the shadows behind a row of crates. Jed scanned the alleyways and rooftops, his instincts sharp from years on the trail. Clara, surprisingly quiet, watched the gang too, noting each man's position and movements. The leader, MacCready, slammed his fist on the table. I say we ride out tonight and take the Weston girls' cabin. Make 'em pay before morning. One of his men laughed. Easy pickings, boss. Jed felt a fire ignite in his chest. He whispered to Clara, That's our cue. They stepped out of the alley with rifles ready, guns gleaming in the sun. A pair of townsfolk spotted them, frozen in shock, but none dared intervene. MacCready looked up, eyes widening. Well, look what the prairie spat out, he sneered. Big Jed Boone and the widow herself. Thought you'd run. Jed's voice was calm, low, and filled with menace. Not runnin'. Not today. Clara stepped forward, her shawl falling back to reveal her face, fierce, unafraid. The gang hesitated. No one had seen her like this before. This quiet strength radiated, and Jed knew the men could sense it. Step aside, boys, she said, voice ringing clear. Or you'll regret it. MacCready laughed. You got yourself one more fool to die with you, Boone. Jed shifted his stance. I'll take the fool if it comes to it. For a tense moment, the street held its breath. Then McCready drew, and Jed fired first, the shot ringing through the narrow street. His bullet cracked McCready's gun from his hand. Chaos erupted. Clara, surprisingly agile, ducked behind a barrel and fired at the nearest man, forcing him to drop his weapon. Jed moved like a storm, knocking one outlaw off balance, catching another with the butt of his rifle. The townsfolk peeked from behind corners, murmuring. None had dared interfere with the gang before, but seeing Boone and Weston's courage emboldened them. One by one, the gang's men were disarmed or scattered. McCready, bloodied but alive, leapt onto a horse and tried to flee. Jed's rifle barked, sending the man's hat flying into the dust. The remaining men surrendered, the last one trembling before Clara. Please, don't hurt us. Clara's eyes were icy. Leave. And don't come back. Jed holstered his rifle and surveyed the street. The townsfolk were silent, awed, grateful. He tipped his hat slightly. Keep your eyes open. Ain't over till the land's safe. But as they turned to leave, a figure appeared in the shadows of the saloon doorway. It was Sheriff Callahan, his badge gleaming, hands raised. Well, Boone, he said with a sly smile. Seems you've been busy. Jed frowned. Sheriff, ain't exactly been keepin' law and order, have ya? The sheriff's smile didn't falter. I've been busy. And some debts in town aren't mine to collect. Jed's jaw tightened. So you knew all along. You were protectin' these varmints. Callahan shrugged. Business is business, Boone. Land changes hands. People die. That's how the West works. Clara's face burned with fury. You'd let them hurt innocent people for money? The sheriff shrugged again. Wouldn't call it innocent. Survival, lady. That's the law. Jed stepped closer, voice low and cold. Then maybe the law needs a new sheriff. Callahan's eyes narrowed. Careful, Boone. That's a dangerous path. Jed didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Clara. We finish this ourselves. You ready? Clara nodded, her hands tight on her rifle. Let's end it. They rode back toward the cabin under the noonday sun, leaving the defeated gang scattered and humiliated. When they arrived, Lottie ran out, eyes wide, and threw herself into Jed's arms. Mr. Boone, you did it. You saved us. Jed laughed softly. We did it, little one. You and your mama too. Clara watched him, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper flickering in her gaze. You've done more than save our home, she said. You've given us hope. Jed tipped his hat again, brushing a hand across his weathered face. Hope's cheap in these parts, ma'am. But I reckon we'll make it last. The wind shifted across the plains, carrying the scent of dust and sagebrush. Somewhere in the distance, the McCready gang plotted revenge, and Sheriff Callahan no doubt fumed in his office. But for now, the cabin stood. The mother and daughter were safe. And Jed Boone, mountain of a man, cowboy, and protector, had reminded the West that even in a land of outlaws and lawless men, courage, loyalty, and a steady hand could still tip the scales. Clara stepped closer, her voice quiet. Jed, I don't know how to repay you. Jed shook his head, eyes on the horizon. Ain't about repayin'. It's about doin' what's right. That's the only coin I take. She smiled faintly, the first real smile in years. Then I'll do the right thing too. Stay with us, if you want. Help rebuild what they tried to take. Jed looked at the small cabin, the mother, the little girl clinging to hope. For the first time in a long while, he felt the West wasn't all lawless dust and blood. There was a place for him here, maybe even a home he hadn't thought he'd ever find. He sheathed his rifle, dusting off his coat, and offered a rare, warm grin. Well, reckon I could stick around a spell. Keep an eye on things. Lottie squealed in delight, hugging her mother. We have a real cowboy. He's gonna stay. Jed chuckled, a deep, rolling sound that echoed across the plains. The wind carried it far, over dry grass and mesas, as if announcing a new chapter in Painted Ridge, one where even giants could protect the weak, and the smallest voices could command the strongest hearts. And for Jed Boone, for Clara Weston, and for little Lottie, the West suddenly felt a little less wild, and a little more like home.